The East India Company, officially known as the Honourable East India Company, was an English corporation created for trade in the Indian Ocean region. It was officially established on the last day of December in the year 1600 by Queen Elizabeth I. At the time of its founding, England was a relatively small player in global trade, surpassed by powers such as Portugal and the Netherlands, which had already established footholds in Asia. The East India Company sought to access the lucrative spice trade, especially in the Banda Islands of Indonesia, known for their production of nutmeg and mace. The company was granted monopolistic control over trade in the East Indies, including the right to trade, wage war, and govern any acquired territories. These powers would later have a profound impact on the company's development, transforming it from a commercial organization into a political and military force. However, in its early stages, the East India Company faced stiff competition from the Dutch East India Company, VOC, which was more powerful and better funded. Throughout the 17th century, the company struggled to establish a foothold in the spice trade, facing opposition from other European powers and local rulers in Southeast Asia. Nevertheless, by the mid-16th century, the company shifted its focus toward India, which offered not only spices but also cotton, silk, and, later, tea and opium. The company's first major breakthrough in India came in the year 1612, when it established a trading post in Surat, Gujarat, following a victory over Portuguese forces. This was followed by the establishment of trading centers in Madras, in the year 40 of the 17th century, Bombay, in the year 68 of the 17th century, and Calcutta, in the year 90 of the 17th century. These trading posts, or factories, allowed the company to consolidate its commercial interests in India and laid the foundation for future British colonial rule, growth and expansion, 17th-18th century. In the 18th century, the Mughal Empire, which had dominated much of India for centuries, began to weaken. This created a power vacuum that the East India Company exploited to great effect. During this period, the company transitioned from being a commercial entity to a political and military force, largely through the use of private armies. One of the key moments in the company's history came in the year 1757 with the Battle of Plassey. Led by Robert Clive, an officer of the East India Company, the company defeated the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, with the help of local allies. This victory not only gave the company control over the wealthy province of Bengal but also marked the beginning of British dominance in India. The company now had de facto control over much of eastern India, signaling the start of its territorial ambitions. Control over Bengal allowed the company to generate immense wealth through taxation and trade. The extraction of wealth from Bengal was a key factor in Britain's rise as a global economic power. The company's ability to collect taxes and control trade allowed it to function as both a government and a commercial enterprise, blurring the lines between corporate and state power. However, this also led to widespread corruption and mismanagement, contributing to the infamous Bengal famine of the year 1770, in which millions died. The East India Company as a colonial power, 18th-19th century. Following the Battle of Buxar in the year 1764, in which the company defeated a coalition of Indian rulers, the company secured the Diwani rights, the right to collect taxes, over Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This marked a formal transition from trade to governance, with the company now functioning as the sovereign power over large parts of India. The company established a system of indirect rule, using local rulers as intermediaries while maintaining ultimate control. As the company's influence expanded across India, it also faced increasing challenges from both local powers and European rivals. The Marathas in western India and the state of Mysore in the south resisted British expansion, leading to a series of conflicts known as the Anglo-Maratha Wars and the Anglo-Mysore Wars. These wars were costly but ultimately ended in British victory, further consolidating the company's control over the Indian subcontinent. By the early 19th century, the East India Company had effectively become the ruler of large parts of India, with its own private army and a sophisticated bureaucracy. However, its governance was characterized by exploitation, corruption, and inefficiency. The company's main interest remained profit, and its policies often resulted in economic hardship for the Indian population. The drain of wealth from India to Britain, combined with exploitative land revenue systems like the permanent settlement, created widespread poverty. The company also played a central role in the opium trade, particularly in exporting opium from India to China. This trade, driven by the high demand for tea in Britain, led to the Opium Wars between Britain and China in the mid-19th century. The company's involvement in this trade contributed to the destabilization of Chinese society and set the stage for European imperialism in East Asia. Decline and fall, 19th century. The decline of the East India Company began in the mid-19th century. Although the company had successfully transformed from a trading enterprise into a powerful political entity, its rule over India was increasingly challenged. Indian dissatisfaction with British policies, such as the annexation of Indian states under the doctrine of lapse, the imposition of British laws and education, and the general insensitivity toward Indian religious and cultural practices, contributed to growing unrest. The tipping point came in the year 1857 with the Indian Rebellion, also known as the Sepoy Mutiny. The rebellion was sparked by a number of grievances, including the use of pig and cow fat in rifle cartridges, which was offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. The mutiny quickly spread across northern and central India, becoming the largest uprising against British rule before Indian independence in the year 1947. Although the rebellion was ultimately crushed, it exposed the weaknesses of the East India Company's administration and the extent of Indian resentment toward British rule. In response, the British government decided to take direct control of India, and in the year 1858, the Government of India Act was passed, which dissolved the East India Company and transferred its powers to the British Crown. India became a formal colony of the British Empire, ruled directly by the British government. The company's final dissolution was completed in the year 1874, when its remaining assets were liquidated. The British Raj, which replaced the company's rule, would continue to govern India until its independence in the year 1947. Legacy of the East India Company. The East India Company left a complex and controversial legacy. On the one hand, it played a crucial role in establishing the British Empire in India and contributed to Britain's global economic dominance in the 18th and 19th centuries. The company's control of trade routes and territories allowed Britain to become the world's leading commercial power, and the wealth extracted from India and other colonies fueled the Industrial Revolution. On the other hand, the East India Company's rule over India was marked by exploitation, repression, and economic devastation. The company's prioritization of profit over the welfare of the Indian population resulted in widespread poverty, famines, and social unrest. The Bengal famine of the year 1770, in which an estimated 10 million people died, is one of the most egregious examples of the company's mismanagement. The East India Company also contributed to the rise of British imperialism and colonialism more broadly. Its methods of indirect rule, economic exploitation, and military conquest became the blueprint for later British imperial endeavours. The company's use of private military forces to conquer and control territories was a precursor to modern forms of corporate power and influence. Culturally, the company had a lasting impact on both India and Britain. The interaction between British and Indian societies during the East India Company's rule led to the development of what is sometimes called Anglo-Indian culture, blending elements of both traditions. The company also contributed to the spread of the English language in India, a legacy that continues to shape Indian society today. The East India Company was one of the most powerful and influential corporations in history. It played a pivotal role in the expansion of the British Empire, shaping the course of global trade, politics, and culture. From its humble beginnings as a small trading company to its dominance over vast parts of India, the story of the East India Company is one of ambition, greed, and power. Its legacy is a reminder of the complex interplay between commerce, politics, and imperialism in shaping the modern world. Although the company was dissolved in the year 1874, its impact can still be felt today, particularly in the former colonies of the British Empire, where the consequences of its rule continue to shape societies and economies.